The Puck Portfolio with Andy MacNeil.
Hey, welcome to the Puck Portfolio. My name is Andy MacNeil. I'm your host. I'm here on weekdays to provide NHL projections, picks, and betting advice. But with the trade deadline coming up on Friday, March 8th, thought it was important to talk to my buddy, Stephen Whyno from the AP, Associated Press hockey writer. He knows a lot about the goings-ons of the NHL, and he's got a lot to say about the Washington Capitals, a team he covers very closely, a player that he thinks will be almost certainly on the move come Friday. But we'll get to that interview in a little bit. Of course, you can check out yesterday's show on Monday. I broke down all my projections for Tuesday's NHL odds. Today, we're just going to focus on the trade deadline with this conversation with Stephen Whyno. Of course, check out our great sponsor, NorthStar Bet, via the link in the description below. But yeah, let's get to that conversation with Stephen Whyno right now. All right, happy to bring on Stephen Whyno from the Associated Press, who I think is getting ready to take in Washington Capitals practice here. Stephen, how you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Pretty good, man. So I just want to get right to it. What's the latest with the Washington Capitals? What do you see at practice today, first of all?
Well, TJ Oshie is on the ice before practice. He's been out with the nagging back injury he's been dealing with for several months and really several years now, and he looks great. TJ Oshie is 4 games away from 1,000 in his career, and is going to hit that milestone soon. But this is a team now bracing for changes, and by the time the deadline comes on Friday and they return home Saturday to face the Chicago Blackhawks and Connor Bedard, this is going to be a very different looking team.
So Anthony Mantha is a player that I've heard a lot. It seems like a guy that maybe some of the teams that are interested in a player like Jake Gensel could maybe settle for. Not to say that Mantha isn't a pretty worthwhile add to any team looking to contend in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but of course not as big of a fish as a guy like Gensel. So what are you hearing on Anthony Mantha and maybe some of the other Capitals players?
Andy, a very desired player, Anthony Mantha. But yeah, you're right. I think that the teams in on the Jake Gensel sweepstakes are then going to maybe spin around to a Tyler Toffoli with the New Jersey Devils, and then after that, probably to Anthony Mantha. And this is a guy who has scored 20 goals this season. His first 20-goal season since he was with Detroit, has had really a bounce back year after a disappointing performance last season, and kind of a lot of expectations that had come from that trade for Jacob Vrana in 2019, and just how long ago that was. This is a guy who I know the Edmonton Oilers and the Winnipeg Jets are looking at, among other teams, that you're looking for a guy, a middle six winger, to play with good players. And when you're talking about Jake Gensel, Tyler Toffoli, Anthony Mantha certainly fits in that. He's been one of the most consistent players the Capitals had this season, along with Connor McMichael, along with Alexi Protas. Anthony Mantha is a guy who is going to fetch a return at the deadline, which would have seemed crazy in October.
Yeah, it would have seemed crazy. He turned into a little bit of an analytics darling as well. He has really great underlying metrics. And yeah, I guess you could see why a guy like Tyler Toffoli would maybe be a little bit more desirable. Pretty clutch player, has a lot of playoff experience, etc. But outside of Washington, what are the biggest things that you see happening heading into the trade deadline? Maybe some of the players that you're handicapping to be moved on Friday, March 8th. I know there is a lot of talk, like we said, about Jake Gensel and players like Tyler Toffoli. But is there anybody else out there that maybe we're not talking about enough?
I'll give you names of a couple centers, Andy, and it's Alexander Wenberg in Seattle and Adam Henrique in Anaheim. Those are the two guys in the center market, at least among the kind of middle six center sort of type players who are going to be on the move. Dave Hacksaw and the Seattle Kraken have already said Alexander Wenberg is being held out of skates in games for trade-related reasons, and so he's going to be on the move. Colorado Avalanche and the New York Rangers both have interest in Alexander Wenberg. And I think whichever of those teams does not end up with Wenberg is going to circle back with Pat Verbeek and the Anaheim Ducks about Adam Henrique. And I know the Rangers also are interested in Frank Vatrano, who has played for them before, an all-star this year, having a career season for the Anaheim Ducks. He's going to fetch a very interesting return. But when you look at players who are going to be on the move, those are a couple of them. The Calgary Flames, obviously worth watching in up there in terms of Jacob Markstrom and Noah Hannafin potentially being on the move. And among buyers, like, what's Chris Drury going to do with the New York Rangers? He's been linked to guys like Wenberg and Henrique and Vatrano, but also Jacob Chikrin in Ottawa. This is going to be a very interesting deadline because there's not really a heavy Stanley Cup favorite right now. You could look at all the odds yourself and say that there are 7, 8, maybe 10 teams thinking they can win the Stanley Cup, which means it's going to be really active before 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think Rangers GM Chris Drury can be happy with where his team is at right now, especially defensively. They could improve their bottom six forward group a lot at the deadline. But a team that I guess is maybe happy with where they're at is the Florida Panthers. Do you see Florida kind of standing pat at this year's trade deadline?
Yeah, I don't see Florida as a huge buyer here, and I'll throw the Boston Bruins in that mix too, Eddie. That there are teams that are rolling right now. The Florida Panthers look really good against the New York Rangers. They look really good against the Detroit Red Wings. This is a team that's kind of clicking on all cylinders. Maybe kind of on the margins. I think if you're Bill Zito, you're looking at maybe trying to add kind of not Radko Gudas himself, but the kind of sandpaper they had in a Radko Gudas during that Stanley Cup run last year. Someone like Joel Edmondson, who is right in front of me right now with the Washington Capitals, someone like that, a David Savard type, someone who is a kind of a more of a gritty defensive defenseman, because we know the Florida Panthers can score goals. We know Sergei Bobrovsky can stop the puck, but I think there's a little bit of sandpaper that I think is needed there for this team to make another playoff run like they did last spring.
Yeah, as a Bruins fan, I'm happy to hear that they're not interested in player like Adam Henrique, etc. Because as much as a guy like Henrique can play great in the dot, he can kill penalties. You know who else could play great in the dot and kill penalties? Patrice Bergeron. And these bums
Yes.
retired him last year when they blew a 3-1 lead to the Florida Panthers. So I don't want to see them get any help from their GM. I want to see them kind of lie in the bed they've made for themselves as a fan this year. But yeah, the Florida Panthers, I think, are the class of the Eastern Conference. I guess not all that surprising considering how impressive they were on last year's Stanley Cup run. But I guess just finally, if they're out of all the big names out there, Jake Gensel, etc. Who is the player that is most likely going to be moved at the deadline in your eyes?
Well, I think the Capitals have a few of them, but Anthony Mantha would be the guy for me who's absolutely going to be moved, because whoever doesn't get Jake Gensel, and my guess is he's going to go to Vegas because Kelly McCrimmon is a crazy person, and I say that in a good way. That the Golden Knights always wind up getting the big fish in any deadline free agency situation. We saw it back to Mark Stone and Alex Petrangelo and Jack Eichel. Jake Gensel is that guy. I'm preparing to be in Vegas and in Sunrise, Florida, again in June for a rematch of that Stanley Cup final, and the logistics that problems that those create, because those are really good teams with really good coaches. I think Gensel goes. I think Toffoli is kind of the next prize, and Anthony Mantha. He's not a bronze medal for anyone. This is a guy who's having a great year. He's incredible in the locker room, a really good teammate, someone who's great to deal with. And the Edmonton Oilers or the Winnipeg Jets or whoever ends up with Anthony Mantha is going to be very happy they have it.
Well, I'm just hoping that you don't end up, having to go to somewhere like Toronto and Edmonton for the Stanley Cup final. But hey,
I
who
wouldn't
knows,
hate
right?
that either. Yeah, I wouldn't hate that either.
All right, Stephen. Well, thanks a lot for joining me on today's show, and I will catch up with you later, man.
Thanks for having me, and enjoy the madness.
All right, great stuff from Steven. Lots of insight into the NHL trade deadline. Could definitely see a player like Anthony Mantha being on the move to a team like Edmonton or Winnipeg should they not be able to land a bigger fish, or maybe Mantha is the perfect fit for either of those teams. Either way, going to be super interesting. We'll have coverage right here on the Canada Sports Betting YouTube channel. So be sure to keep it locked, as we'll be back on Wednesday for a look ahead to Thursday's NHL games here on the Puck Portfolio. Until then, you can check out my weekly NHL Insights piece over at canadasportsbetting.ca. That'll be going up a little bit later on Tuesday. Until then, good luck with your bets. We've got the Panthers tonight, hoping to bump that new coach bump the Devils will have as they fired Lindy Ruff on Monday. So I still like the Panthers. Don't put much stock into the new coach bump, and we'll see if I'm right. We'll talk to you on Wednesday when we look ahead to Thursday's NHL odds. Until then, good luck with your bets. See you later.